horrible then. Nazgul. All right. 1988, the RSMP raid on Ganakawi. These are just, we're going through historical materialism, so these are brief things, and then we'll hit it, and then I think we're going to start something new. So yeah, here we go. Oh, look, they're blocked. In the spring of 1988, nearly 200 RSMP officers and SWAT team agents cracked down on Gananawaki cigarette dealers, arresting 5 people. Mohawk Warriors replied by blocking 2 provincial highways running through the reserve, thereby closing the Mercer Bridge leading to Montreal. 1989 Aquanasi Casino. After the 1988 referendum organized by the Tribal Council rejected the proposed constructions of a $2.7 million high-stakes casino on the reservation, a group of Aquanasi warriors blocked roads entering the reservation on June 20th, 1989. This was followed by 10-day armed standoff with police forces. A local anti-casino faction was formed to oppose the warrior societies, leading to shots being fired in the streets and several buildings being burnt down. 1990 turmoil of the Ganektion. In March 1990, a helicopter was shot down over Ganechkan, wounding Dr. James Van Kirk. Both New York State Police and Mohawk Warriors set up roadblocks to control traffic after the incident. 1990 Ochre crisis. Disputes the extensions of the golf course over the ancestral cemetery in the pines of Ganektekgi. Mohawk community members decided to occupy the pines to make sure they would not be destroyed. The SQ set up to remove them on July 11th, 1990, provoking an exchange of fire which left police Corporal Marcel Lamy dead. It was never established who had fired the first shot. The SQ retreated, leaving several police vehicles behind, which warriors then used to build barricades on the highway. In solidarity, the Ganniwakingi warriors seized and blockaded the Mercer Bridge, a vital route into Montreal. The standoff would last 78 days, with more than 2,000 police officers and 4,500 Canadian soldiers being deployed, equipped with tanks, armored personnel, carriers, and helicopters. It was the largest military operation ever initiated by the Canadian government on its alleged soil. The Mohawk resistance at Ganishke sparked solidarity actions across Canada, and thousands of supporters swarmed the area, setting up solidarity camps, frustrated by the Mercer Bridge blockade, increasing their commute time. White residents of towns around the Ganekwaaki group increasingly violent towards their Mohawk neighbors, with numerous cases of white vigilantes beating up indigenous people and rioting around burning effigies of Mohawk warriors. On August 28th, 1990, 75 families trying to leave Ganakkweke, now surrounded by the army, were attacked by white gangs who threw rocks at them as they traversed the narrow passage of the Whiskey Point. SQ officers stood by, not reacting, and after the event, a Mohawk elder died from a heart attack provoked by the trauma. On December 18th, 1990, SQ officers and Canadian soldiers landed on Tegekawitha Island, attempting to move to Ganekawiki, but hundreds of Mohawk blocked their way. The soldiers ended up having to be airlifted out by helicopter. After a 7-hour fight, they left 22 soldiers and 75 Mohawk wounded. On September 26, 1990, Mohawk defenders decided to move out of the Gene Hasteki treatment center, which was besieged by the army. Canadian soldiers attacked Mohawk warriors, women and children, as they tried to make their way out. Bayoneting 14-year-old Wanik Horn Miller, Hetinath's daughter, as she was exiting the camp with her 4-year-old sister, Ganetio. The Oka crisis left a substantial legacy which resulted in the Royal Commissions on Aboriginal People being launched in 1991 in an attempt to understand the underlying causes of conflicts in the hope of avoiding similar outbreaks of violence in the future. This process eventually led to the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions of Canada in 2008. 1991, visit to Libya. On June 11th, 1991, a group of Mohawk traditionals, including Ataron Gantangan, traveled to Tripoli, Libya, to receive a $250,000 reward from Colonel Amir El Qadifia. 1993, Imperwash. In 1993, protesters from the Stony Point First Nations near Sarnia, Ontario, set up an encampment on a military base from which their old elders had previously been evicted in 1942 and forced to live in harsh conditions in a nearby territory of the Kettle Point First Nations. The occupation of the military base followed the eviction notice which the Stony Point First Nations had sent to the Department of National Defense, reminding the federal government of its original promises to return the land to its indigenous owners. 2 years later, the reoccupation that extended into the portions of the Epperwash Provincial Park where the community had the ancestral cemetery. On September 6, 1995, heavily armed riot police forces intervened. 17-year-old Nicholas Cortele drove a school bus in their directions as they approached. The RSMP forces fired thousands of rounds of ammunition in Cortele's direction, wounding him and killing his dog. In the ensuing firefight, Ojibwa land defender Dudley George was killed by the police. After the commission determined that the government was responsible for the tragedy at the Stony Point community continued living on the southwestern Ontario base, a military base, where they remain until this day. 1994, Operation Campus of Scorpio Saxon, alleging that the Mohawk Warrior Society possessed heavy weaponry, making it, quote, the biggest extremist Aboriginal group and potentially the most violent in Canada, end quote, and estimating that the Warriors funneled $3.6 billion worth of tobacco products from the United States to Canada through Aquanasi's porous border. Canadian authorities prepared to launch massive raids on several Mohawk communities. As a result, Operation Scorpion Saxon trained 1,500 Canadian soldiers, 2,000 RSMP, and 2,000 combined arms exercises of 2,000 provincial police officers for an invasion of Mohawk territories, conducting combined arms exercises with the Petawawa, Val Carter, and Georgetown, Canada forces bases. Yet an actual invasion, Operation Campus, was called off 8 days before its scheduled start, when CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Services, agents warned the government that the invasion might cause a nationwide Indigenous uprising and result in many deaths. 1995, Gustafson River Lake. Lasting from August 18th to September 17th, 1995, The Gustafsson Lake standoff started as a conflict between the Secwepemc traditionals, who at the time were performing their Sundance ceremonies, and the alleged owner of the cattle ranch. The landowner's evictions noticed against the Sundancers provoked what became the largest domestic operations in history, in the history of the RSMP, with more than 350 police and military officers armed with M16 assault rifles, machine guns, and armored personnel carriers, besieging 18 indigenous land defenders in the Sundance camp, including Mohawk allies, such as AIM members John Decca Juwengun Hill, splitting the sky, quote unquote. On September 11th, two Tees Penton land defenders driven around the area to get water stumbled on the powerful explosive device that had been planted by the RSMP, who then opened fire on them. They managed to escape. They managed to escape by jumping in the lake, while an armed personnel carrier was disabled by the Peepmix elders, Wolverines. The RSMP shot a total of 77,000 rounds of ammunition at the encampment. On September 17th, after the police shot off all media communications coming out of Gustafsson Lake, and launched what would later be revealed as an avowed, quote, smear campaign, presenting the land defenders as terrorists. The indigenous land defenders decided to burn their weapons and walk out of their camp. 15 of them received jail sentences, including a 5-year sentence for Wolverine. Their lawyer, Bruce Clarkey, was charged with criminal contempt of court, arrested in the courtroom, and put in jail after he invoked both the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982 to urge that the traditional indigenous laws still held sovereign status on unceded territories. 1997, the Onondaga beating. On May 18, 1997, 200 New York state troopers raided a Haudenosaunee ceremonial gathering taking place next to Highway 81 near Onondaga to oppose New York State's attempts to collect taxes from indigenous businesses. Under the pretense that they were blocking the highway, the protesters, children included, were violently clubbed by the police, and a baby was thrown out of his stroller. 2 years later, Ronald Jones Sr., one of the organizers of the gathering and the father of the owner of the land where people had gathered, was brutally murdered under mysterious circumstances, with his hands severed and his house burnt down. Even though all charges were dropped against the 26 Haudenosaunee traditionals arrested in 1997, the victim of the police beating never obtained justice for the violence they experienced. However, the state did revoke its plan to collect taxes from indigenous businesses. I'm going to look back a little bit. All right, looks like we're good. 1999 burnt church. In 1999, non-native fishermen destroyed thousands of Mi'kmaq lobster traps to contest a September 17th Canadian Supreme Court ruling recognizing Aboriginal people's rights to harvest lobster out of season. Mi'kmaq warriors responded by setting up an encampment in Burnt Church, New Brunswick. The reaction from the part of non-natives was particularly violent, with 600 armed fishermen blocking the Yarmouth Harbor in Nova Scotia to keep native ships out of the waters, sinking one of them. 3 Mi'kmaq men were wounded by a truck driven by non-natives, and a scared sacred burnt church ceremony aboard was set on fire. The conflict continued in 2000 and 2001 with several standoffs between the RSMP and the Mi'kmaq fishermen, costing the federal government over $15 million. 2004, James Gabriel police raid. On January 14, 2004, based on a 2003 agreement with Canadian authorities, Gunna Hasateki, band council chief James Gabriel ordered 67 police officers from outside of the community to crack down on business linked to the Warrior Society. On April 12th, after swarming James Gabriel's office, Kanekgin Setigi community members surrounded the police station and confiscated police weapons, stating that the community would be patrolled by its own residents and set up barricades in case they were attacked. James Gabriel's house was burnt to the ground. On May 3rd, 2004, the band counselors ordered a new raid against the Warriors, who managed to repel his 60 policemen. The date was symbolic, given that it was 5 years after the death of Mohawk Warrior Joe David, who died from injuries sustained when he was shot by James Gabriel's police officers in 1991. Accused of mismanaging the crisis, Quebec's Minister of Public Security, Jacqueline Chagan, was forced to resign. Oh, you got his forceful resign. Ooh. Motherfucker should have been thrown into jail.
Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam, Miriam. 2006. Ganana Hastastan. On February 28th, 2006, a group of community members from Ogasawin erected tents in a wooden house on the site of a projected housing project, Douglas Creek Estates, in what settlers considered to be the town of Caledonia. And the site was renamed Ganan Hatestenton, named the land to defend, stating that the territory belonged to the Haudenosaunee by virtue of the 1784 Heidelman Proclamation. The land defenders burnt the injunction order, ordering them off the land. In the early morning of April 20th, 2006, heavily armed Ontario Provincial Police, OPP, took over the site, arresting 16 people. The same day, several hundred land defenders returned to the site, forcing the police to retreat. Tire bonfires were lit on Highway 6 in protest, and a wooden bridge over the rail was burnt. In solidarity with the protesters, the Mercer Bridge in Kanakowiki was blocked for close to an hour, while railroad tracks were shut down in Tydendaga. Later, on May 22nd, a truck crashed through the gates of the hydro substation next to the Kananganatestan, causing a blackout in the regions for close to a week, pushing authorities to declare a state of emergency. After numerous clashes with settler residents and an incident involving the U.S. Border Patrol, vehicles being seized by protesters on June 9th, Ontario Premier Delton McGunty called off the ongoing negotiations. However, on August 27th, the Ontario Court of Appeal ruled that the protesters could remain on the site. The Haudenosaunee traditionals were still at Hastistan. It's H. H is okay. Yeah, so it's Kananganastintan. To this day, with its serving as a base for the new preoccupation, which began nearby in February 2020, which protesters have dubbed the 1492 Land Back Lane. 2009, protest against armed border guards. In spring of 2009, hundreds of Akwesasne Mohawks protested the decision that Canadian border guards would be allowed to carry 9mm Beretta handguns, given the risk that these weapons could be used against Indigenous people who experience difficulties with border agents on a daily basis. A protest camp was set up to the office of the Canadian Border Service Agency, CBSA, on Cornwall Island. The Akwesasne pushing the guards to leave the premise and shut down the bridge and the border crossing on May 31st, 2009. This made it impossible for Akwesasne community members to circulate through their own territory for 6 weeks. The CBSA office of Cornwall Island was abandoned, and its staff moved to new buildings built closer to the settler town of Cornwall. It is estimated that Akwesasne community members constituted 70% of daily traffic crossing the border. 2012, Idle No More. Following, oh my gosh, here we go. Atawampakasgant Chief Teresa Spence's hunger strike to oppose Conservative Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper's omnibus bill C-45, which facilitated an environmentally destructive infrastructure project without the permission of the traditional Indigenous caretakers of the land, and allowing a single band council vote to trigger the absolute surrender, quote unquote, of their land. The Idle No More movement quickly spread through Canada. In addition to the numerous flash mobs of Canada and beyond, Akwesasne's traditional bridge crossing was blocked on January 5th, 2013, on the action that was coordinated with the other blockade or border crossing on Indigenous territories in Sarnia, Ontario, Fort Erie, Ontario, and Surrey, British Columbia. 2012, Three Feathers Casino raided. The Three Feather Casino, operating independent of the tribal council in the 55,000 square foot building in Akwesasne since the summer of 2011, was raided by U.S. federal marshals, border patrol agents, and Mohawk tribal police officers in December 2012. The federal court trial saw all charges dropped against the 4 members of the Ganeri Hokagwa Longhouse, who were suspected of operating the casino. 2013, Ellis Pogatog. In June 2013, Texas-based Southwestern Energy, SWN Resources, started preliminary tests for fracking shale gas in the Mi'kmaq territory of Estopagata near Monotone, New Brunswick. Outraged by the project starting without their permission, the Pagtog community members obstructed Highway 226, staged several demonstrations in the following weeks, with some protesters being arrested. Hundreds of supporters soon stormed the Alessia Pagtog, sitting up in camps and blocking several highways in the area. The Mi'kmaq stressed that their sovereignty had been recognized by 1760 and 1761 peace and friendship treaties, and that no project could be undertaken in their land without their permission. On October 17, 2013, several hundred heavy militarized RSMP officers raided their camp on Highway 134, wounding a Mi'kmaq warrior with a rubber bullet and arresting and beating 40 land and water defenders. SWN Resources reported that it was losing $60,000 daily because of the roadblocks and the destruction of its equipment and quietly abandoned the shale gas fracking project. 2016, Standing Rock. I said C. I've been saying C. RSCMP. Maybe I'm not. Oh well. Opposing the construction of Dakota Access Pipeline on the land recognized as Sioux territory by the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty, indigenous activists started gathering near the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota in the spring of 2016. By the fall, more than 7,000 supporters from 300 different indigenous nations had joined 3 different camps blocking construction work for the pipeline, making it the largest gathering of North American Native people in modern history. Hundreds of militarized police officers from several police departments, including the National Guard, attacked the, quote, treaty camp on October 27th, 2016, and would soon use water cannons against the protesters in the freezing November weather. Despite this hundreds of protesters remained in the area until the end of February 2017. The pipeline was completed in April 2017, although a district court judge subsequently ordered the Armed Corps of Engineers to shut down the pipeline temporarily to conduct an environmental impact review in July 2020. The decision was overturned on the appeal in August 2020, and the pipeline resumed its operations. 2018, cannabis dispensary. With the legalization of cannabis in Canada, several independent dispensaries opened in Taidenga and Hanataski, where they soon outnumbered Quebec-owned cannabis shops, while the mayor of Oka, the settler town next to Ganenhastaki, pressed the police to shut down Mohawk dispensaries to no avail. Tribal and band councils also attempted to curtail this emergent business in other Mohawk territories. After a raid in Taidenga in February 2019, the Mohawk Council of Aquanasi ordered police raids on 2 unlicensed cannabis dispensaries on the Canadian portion of the reservation, as tensions were already high with the Band Council, which had recently supported the Dundee settlement, relinquishing the Mohawk Nation's claim of over 20,000 acres of its traditional territory. The police officers found themselves surrounded by warriors. While conducting a second raid, and a police cruiser was subsequently burnt. 2020, railway blockade in support of Wet'suwet'en. In the early mornings of February 6, 2020, 36 RCMP police vehicles, along with their dogs, assault rifles, bulldozers, excavators, drones, and infrared sensors, crossed the barricade where West Coast Wet'suwet'en land defenders were written, quote, reconciliation to guard the interests of their territory. The RCMP were serving an injunction which Coastal GasLink had obtained from the Supreme Court of British Columbia to allow their employees to build a $6.6 billion pipeline on unceded Wet'suwet'en territory, despite the opposition of the nation's hereditary chiefs. Following the February 2020 raid, a large solidarity movement rose in support of the Wet'suwet'en, spearheaded by the railway blockades organized by Mohawk warriors in the Taidenga and Ganhanawaki, which in turn caused virtually all freight and passenger trains traffic to grind to a halt for several weeks throughout the country. On February 24th, despite the ongoing negotiations with Canadian Ministers of Indigenous Service, Mark Miller, Ontario Provincial Police Officer, raided the Denaga blockade, arresting 10 warriors. The police refused, however, to raid the Ganawaki blockade, fearing that its defenders had military-grade guns. In the wake of the movement, land reoccupation also took place in Akwesasne in Howesagan, where the camp called 1492 land bank was set up against the housing development project bordering the town of Caledonia. Yeah. The struggle was interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but came back to the forefront in November 2021 when the RCMP conducted another violent raid in Wet'suwet'en territory, violently arresting more than 30 land and water defenders following the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs' decisions to close the road to the pipeline workers camp given their refusal to leave the area. And that's the end of all those. Concepts and glossaries. Oh my gosh. Let me see this. Oh no. How many? Let me see where this goes to. I'm looking at something. All right, looks like I'm going to be defining a whole bunch of words and trying to sound them out. Oh my gosh. Wait. Am I done? Hold on, I'm looking at something, everybody. I might be done. Sorry, I'm looking ahead, everybody. Give me a little bit. Pronunciation, guys, about the contributes. Hold on a second, everybody. Index. I think by the index. When at the glossary is usually the end of the book. Looks like I'm done. Yeah, this looks done. Yeah. Yeah, the pronunciation guide. I didn't know it was in this book. Let me go back up to where I was at. I think I'm done. I think you're right. I think I'm done. All right, then everybody can help me pick out another book. And another indigenous. Yeah, concepts and concept glossary. I wish Two Spirit was here. Oh, let me see something.